Good afternoon. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I'm here at Clyde's of Gallery Place in Washington, D.C., together with one of our panelists. We have two more of our panelists remote. This is, I guess, the third time we've done this hybrid event here in Washington at Clyde's of Gallery Place, and we're going to keep doing it. So mark your calendars. Second Wednesday of each month at 12 noon, actually 11:30, so you can come here and meet people and rub shoulders and have some food to eat, because that's what we're doing here. And sorry, Matt and Chip, you're going to miss out today, but we do appreciate you joining us and being part of this Broadband Breakfast live online, Broadband Breakfast for Lunch event. Before introducing formally our guests, I want to remind everyone about our upcoming schedule, which we've just announced or will be announcing on our site later today. Next Wednesday, the 17th of January, 2022, we will be having a session on the state's role in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we'll be having several state broadband office representatives with us to talk about what's on their minds as far as implementing IIJA. The week following, January 26th, we'll be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and its impact on the fields of media, law, finance, and government. The next week, February 2nd, Groundhog Day, we're going to be talking about, and it seems quite appropriate because we're talking about broadband mapping, and that is surely a topic that is for Groundhog Day. What's new and what's old, and what can be done to improve broadband maps. And then next month, February 9th, mark your calendars, here at Clyde's of Gallery Place, we'll be back again with a discussion on cryptocurrency and how its power can be harnessed. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being with us, and thank in particular each of our panelists. We're going to start off with one of our remote panelists, and very grateful for him being with us. Chip Pickering is the CEO of Encompass. And I didn't know until, I don't know, a year or two ago, longer than it should have been, that Encompass actually stands for something. And if I get that right, it's the, well, maybe I'm not going to get it right. Chip, sorry, you have to help me out.
Well, the Internet and Competitive Networks Association.
There we go. Internet and Competitive Networks Association.
So it's both descriptive and aspirational, that we encompass all the technologies and networks.
Encompass is obviously extremely well known, very, very important group in Washington. And Chip in particular is extremely well known because of his role. And I've heard you say this, Chip. So he was a congressman from Mississippi's 3rd Congressional District, but he was also an aide to Senator Trent Lott. Have I got that right?
That is correct. And I went from being a staffer to a member, and I lost all my power and influence.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? But Chip is one of those members of Congress who really understands the topic of which he speaks, which is telecommunications, and has a very deep knowledge of that. I know from interviewing him as a congressman. And thank you for being with us and for repeat visits. So this is not the first time you've been a guest on Broadband Breakfast Live Online. So thank you for being with us. He will be followed by Matt Polka. Matt as well, a repeat guest. And we were just chatting about how, Matt, you've been at some of our early, when it was Broadband Breakfast for breakfast, as opposed to Broadband Breakfast for lunch. But Matt is the CEO and president of ACA Connects, which is America's Communications Association, a trade group for independent, smaller, and medium-sized broadband, cable, and phone businesses. And so he's been super active in broadband issues as well as, communications and video issues. So we're really glad you could be with us. Thank you, Matt.
Glad to be here, Drew. Thanks.
And batting cleanup, of course, is Claude Aiken. Claude he's one of those fearless wisps, right? I mean, they don't, they don't not show up for something.
We always show up.
Some little Omicron thing, right? I mean, in fact, they we're so adamant on holding their conference in March of 2020 that we were all on pins and needles whether we were going to go to it or not until like literally the day before we had to decide. But he's had some great conferences last year. I went to both WISP America in Grapevine, Texas, and WISPapalooza, and I'm sure they'll be holding them again.
Absolutely.
And
We have about 15 minutes or so, or should we just take off?
Make sure to mute yourself if you are not a panelist. So apologies for the interruption there. Claude, you were saying that you are going to definitely do those events, right?
That is certainly the plan.
Yeah, and I think that WISPA, the association, has really risen in prominence and importance in Washington over the last 4 or 5 years, in part because of Claude in your role as executive director, and of course by the incredibly entrepreneurial nature of your members, the wireless internet providers. And so we'll be hearing from Claude about what's on his mind as far as priorities. So let's turn it over to you, Chip. Give us 5 to 7 minutes on what your key priorities as an association and some of the lenses through which you're viewing the policy issues on broadband right now.
Well, Drew, thank you for convening us with Claude and Matt and continuing our conversation on all things broadband. As we were talking before we started, we are living in the midst of the Zoom boom. The fact that Matt and I are remote and you and Claude are in person, it reflects the new reality that has come through the pandemic. And just to kind of look back over the last 2 years, I do want to really commend all of our associations and our member companies and the broadband industry for really stepping up during a national crisis that has been so disruptive. But we were able to keep America connected. We all took the pledge to keep every American connected during this time. And I'm very proud of all of our members who did so. But it kept both commerce, education, healthcare, and it really proved to the American public and to Congress and our policymakers how critical broadband connectivity is. And because of that, we are now celebrating the bipartisan infrastructure bill with historic transformational levels of funding included in that $65 billion that will really do something close to replicating what our country did when we made a commitment and a national consensus, national commitment to electrify the entire country and bring electricity to every home, no matter how remote or how rural or how disadvantaged. And that moment is now for broadband, as we have the infrastructure funding at historic levels. And I want to commend Senator Portman and Bennett and King for being the leaders of the Bridge Act, which was the framework which was adopted by the bipartisan House and Senate leadership on this very important commitment. So as we look to the year, what is our priorities? And I want to focus on 3 things. One, how do we now set the parameters and the principles and the eligibility criteria going forward on how this huge level of funding, $42 billion on the deployment side, and then an additional approximately $20 billion on affordability in ways that we can give both access, connectivity, and affordability in a very comprehensive way. So we'll be working very closely with the new leadership at the Commerce Department. Alan Davidson, we commend and congratulate him for being confirmed by the Senate yesterday to take over at NTIA. We want to work with him closely as he sets the standards for future-proof networks, that we build fast networks that are future-proof, that can scale over time to really power the economy of the future and to allow the U.S. to lead the world in broadband and 5G and the networks of the future. This is critically important, not only to give every American the opportunity that comes with broadband connectivity, but as we look at our international competitiveness and the national security of our country, winning the race to robust broadband, both fixed and mobile wireless, will be critical to America's future. And so we'll be focusing on that both at the federal level with NTIA, but also we'll be working very closely with the states that are adopting their efforts and their parameters and their priorities on broadband deployments as they will then execute the broadband infrastructure funding. The second priority for Encompass members is also a critical component of infrastructure and connectivity, and that is the 12 gigahertz proceeding at the FCC, so that we can have the spectrum that is needed, the vital mid-band spectrum that is critical to the race to build out 5G across the country, but also for members like Matt and Claude, fixed wireless, dynamic sharing, opportunistic use and sharing is 500 megahertz of spectrum in the very valuable mid-band. And we believe that it can be used with on a dual use, both for satellite services as well as 5G terrestrial mobile commercial wireless. And so we have a tremendous opportunity to combine historic levels of funding with an infusion of spectrum that can be used in many diverse ways and in every market and every possible, from rural to small town to urban areas, that will really help our country achieve many of the objectives of connectivity. The third thing that we're going to focus on is the states, as they both do their broadband funding, but also so that they have the best practices on permitting and on fees, so that we can build not only fast networks, but build them fast. It is critical that we don't have the barriers to deploy, the delays in deployment, and that we can really speed up the implementation and give the states the resources and the incentives and localities the incentives to give our member companies, all three of our associations that are building new networks, the ability to build as fast as possible. Every American, every community, the political reality now, for whether you're a member of Congress or a city councilman, is that everybody wants the best broadband possible. They want fast, affordable broadband, and they want it to be brought to each of their communities or cities or towns as fast as possible. And so the permitting delays, the high fees of the past have to be set aside so that we can all achieve our objectives of broadband connectivity as quickly as possible. So those are the three areas that Encompass and our members will be focusing on.
Well, wonderful, and thank you for that great description and right on time. Appreciate you always, Chip. I certainly have lots of questions, but I'd rather pass the floor to our next panelist, Matt Polka, for your take on the priorities and needs for 2022. Oh, and you're on mute. Yeah, you know that.
There we go. Okay. Glad to do it. Thank you, Drew, for having me here once again. Broadband Breakfast for Lunch. Very catchy. Love that. Look forward to getting back with you in person for sure. And great to be here. Let me first start off by saying to Chip, not a leadoff hitter, but I think a leadoff home run. That was a very, very good summary of issues that we care about at ACA Connects. And we'll certainly be, working together on many of those issues, whether it's, just making money available, it's time for deployment, permitting, things of that nature. A lot there, so I appreciate that. And maybe I'll just start at a little broader base, taking a look back first before looking ahead. The last 2 years from a broadband perspective are incredibly significant for our country and for our country's history. And we're very, very proud of our members at ACA Connects America's Communications Association as smaller providers in small towns, rural areas, very remote places to live and work. Of what they did, Chip used the right term, we kept everybody connected. And in our markets, it's a lot harder to do that sometimes than in the urban markets. And, there are challenges, let's put it that way, both in urban and rural areas. Certainly the challenges that our members faced were mounting, and they had a lot that they had to do to meet the challenge to keep everybody connected. But as I've said many times before, it's an untold, unsung story. So as we look forward to what's to come, I think we can build on the success of our broadband industry in general, realize that there is increasing competition in the markets, and build on those successes as we talk about infrastructure and other broadband and federal state funding going forward. So it's been a pleasure to work with our members, and we are very, very proud to tell their story as they develop from a technological and broadband perspective to meet their community's need, which really connects them to the world. As we look ahead to 2022, we are going to be focused on many of the same issues that Chip mentioned from an Encompass standpoint. Last year in 2021, our focus was working with members of Congress on the language that resulted in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Fund. We felt it was very, very important for Congress to understand that this money, this once in a generation, once in a lifetime pot of money that was going to be used for broadband, there was a great opportunity to meet the needs where broadband is needed most, and not to get into some of the issues that we've dealt with in the past as associations and governments where we've had conflict over use of money where broadband providers already existed. And frankly, the rules came out in that direction. They focused on unserved areas first, maybe then with underserved areas, depending on how much money it stays over. They focused on a challenge process to ensure that companies that have invested their hard-earned dollars, that those investments are respected, and that states and broadband providers of all kinds can participate in looking to use this money in the wisest, most efficient ways possible to get broadband where it's needed to most. Not where it's needed most, not only from a deployment standpoint, but also, as Chip mentioned, affordability, which is very, very important to our members in ensuring that all of our customers are connected, whether they can't afford it or whether they don't even understand why broadband is so important. So we're very mindful now as we go forward on the implementation phase of the BEAD program from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Fund that'll be handled through the NTIA to make sure that the rules of the act are followed and that we can focus money where it's needed the most. So as Chip said, we'll be focusing our time with our members, with state associations, with policymakers on the state level to help educate, advocate, help them to understand the rules that are taking place back and forth on the BEAD program so that we can, again, use this money efficiently to get it where it's needed the most and help to serve Americans that don't have broadband today and help to build up broadband where it's needed for future proofing going forward. As we look ahead also, mapping will be a key part of that. You and Chip mentioned that sort of with the Groundhog Day analogy, how true that is. This time, however, I think we have a greater focus on really understanding where broadband is, down almost to the home level. And I think that's really important as we look to focus on unserved areas with the intent of this law. So we'll be working with the FCC on ensuring that those maps are good, that they are helpful, and that they can really complement what's taking place with the BEAD program. Finally, there's the prospect maybe early on this year of having 3 Democratic commissioners at the FCC. It's been some time coming. The FCC's been 2-2 for some time. But if it does become 3-2, then from our perspective as smaller broadband providers, there is the prospect perhaps of having to debate once again regulation of broadband internet providers through Title II or through other net neutrality rules. And frankly, before we get into that debate, what we're trying to do at ACA Connects is just to really tell the story of our members over the past couple of years to show how competitive those markets have been. And really, if we are moving in that direction, to really help government in Washington to understand the uniqueness of smaller providers and how they are really your partners in government to make this happen. That regulation does have a cost, certainly on smaller providers. So we hope to have a very broad and robust discussion going forward. But I think it's one that I feel good about, and we're ready to go. So a lot ahead. We're excited to get the job done, and let's get to it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for that, Matt. Also right on time. Appreciate that. Let's turn to Claude for some of your perspective on what's new in 2022.
No, absolutely. And again, thank you, Drew, for having me here today. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, again, to kind of extend the sports analogy of batting cleanup here behind two great leaders in the broadband association space. A lot of good has already been said, and I think we at WISPA agree with a lot of what Chip and Matt have already put forth about priorities in the broadband space. Now we at WISPA, I think, kind of to look back a little bit, we try to make space for entrepreneurs and innovators in the broadband ecosystem. And looking back to the times in 2020 and 2021, when Chip mentioned we had this Zoom boom, I think there's nothing better that exemplifies the kind of folks that we represent than the company of Kentucky Fi, which was founded by
Kentucky Fi?
Kentucky Fi,
Kentucky Fi,
which was founded by
like Kentucky Fried Chicken.
But not exactly. Well, more like Kentucky Wi-Fi, but you can go in a bunch of different directions there. But John Gill was a gentleman, IT guy, who lost his job in 2020, like so many Americans unfortunately did. But he exemplifies the spirit of the providers in our association in that instead of lamenting his loss, he went out and started an ISP to provide his community that didn't have affordable high-speed connectivity with just that. And I talked to him just last week. It's going great. He has almost 100 customers now after about 6 months in business. And that is really the space that we're looking
connected
to
on my notebook computer.
Create in the
Still not on my desktop.
Policy space.
The notebook asked me for my username and password. And I know I don't typically
I'll just pause here for a second while we try to
Let's address that.
address that before.
I don't have as many controls as our.
I really don't like talking over our participants.
So if you're not a panelist, please mute yourself. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's the perspective that we come at things from at WISPA. It is trying to really make space for small innovators and entrepreneurs in the broadband space as they continue to grow. And really looking forward this year, it's great to see the IIJ pass. I think we'll talk about that a lot. It's great to see leadership in place now at NTIA with Administrator Davidson. And it'll be great to see a full FCC in place. We're hoping soon as well, so that we can really all get down to the real and hard work of ensuring that all Americans are connected. And looking forward, I think I just kind of want to echo and amplify some of the things that Chip and Matt have said in terms of our policy priorities for this year. And we really encapsulated those actually last year in a plan that we called the Path to Gigabit, where we take a look at all of the somewhat wonky areas of connectivity policy, spectrum, subsidies, infrastructure access, and digital inclusion and adoption, and came up with some recommendations for policymakers there. I'd encourage y'all to take a look at our website there. Can get into a lot more detail than I can get into that today. And spectrum policy continues to be top of mind. We're very optimistic and looking forward to full throttle use of the 6 gigahertz unlicensed band coming online this year. Looking forward to working with the FCC on that one, as well as the 2.5 gigahertz band that's also under consideration before the commission right now, in addition to the many other bands that continue to come down the pike. Again, with the ultimate goal in mind of making those more available and accessible for companies other than the largest providers in the connectivity ecosystem. On the subsidy front, I think we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that this year with the implementation of the BEAD program at NTIA, at engagement at the state level as states grapple with coming up with plans that are necessary to meet the goals of the act with serving the unserved first. And as a former policy guy myself, it really is, I think, incumbent upon us as leaders in the space to educate folks about the impact, because as you turn the various dials, there are potentials for unintended consequences in trying to make sure that really the goals of the act are met to serve the unserved first, and really to connect all Americans with high-speed connectivity before we start talking about underserved areas. I think is going to be top of mind for us. And now, as it relates to infrastructure policy, I'm really pleased to hear the comments of my predecessors there. It's probably one of the least sexy areas of broadband policy, but it really can make a huge difference in terms of access to poles, ducts, conduits, rights of way, tower siting, all of those things. The business of connecting more Americans is made easier the more quickly that companies are able to build that infrastructure out. And with all of the labor and supply chain issues that all of our members are collectively facing, we're always looking for levers to pull to ensure that those projects of building out, of upgrading, of connecting more people are done more quickly. And then last, but certainly not least, we were very pleased to see in the Infrastructure Act work on digital inclusion and adoption, because I think we at WISPA view that as it's the same coin. We're all trying to get more folks online. A lot of what we talk about on the spectrum, the subsidy, the infrastructure side is one side of that coin. But if you don't address affordability, if you don't address education and adoption, that really isn't the whole of the picture. And the more Americans that we get online, the better it is for a whole country, the better it is for the business prospects of our members, which is why we think that's a critical piece to get right, and look forward to working with policymakers at the federal and state level on all of those priorities.
Well, thank you so much, Claude, and thank you to Chip and Matt for setting the stage here. And we're 28 minutes in. We pride ourselves on starting on time and ending on time. So we've got a good bit of time for discussion. I've got a few questions I want to lob to each of you, but in a moment, I'm going to look at our chat windows and I will be able to see your questions and pick out among them. So we've got a good audience here. We appreciate all of you being with us, and we'll look forward to taking your questions for these industry and tech and telecom industry leaders. And thank you for bearing with us. This is kind of, one of our first events where we've had multiple people from different locations. I want to turn, Chip, to you first, because you said something preparing for this. I looked back over one of the previous sessions you attended with us in December of 2020, and you said at that time that you were expecting from the then incoming Biden President-elect, then President-elect Biden, a package on the order of $80 billion in magnitude is what I recall you saying, and came pretty close. 65 billion is within spitting distance of 80 billion. And again, if you add in the 10 billion on the Treasury capital funds, you're probably closer than any other estimate that I had heard. But you also said that those kind of funds would help alleviate some of the traditional contentious issues in telecom. And I want to come back to that prediction of yours, if you will, and say, will the IIJ funding ease any of the other traditional telecom conflicts, including net neutrality, retransmission consent, right-of-way access, municipally funded networks, and concerns about radio frequency interference? Do you have any thoughts on that a year and a month later?
Well, I'm glad that you reminded me of my prediction, and that at least I was close. looking back as to what the level of funding would be. On the question of whether this will ease, it gives us new opportunities and ways to solve problems. Money is not always the only determining factor, but having more money certainly helps ease and solve problems. And let me give you an example. What we would like to do is work with cities and localities and states as they develop their state plans on broadband to include incentives and resources for localities and cities to have the technical assistance, if need be, both in their planning and their permitting and the speed of which they can incentivize deployments and make deployments as, again, not only the fast future-proof networks, but how do we build them as fast as possible? And those resources that can come from the infrastructure bill through NTIA to the states, to the localities, can help solve one of the big problems of remaining barriers or obstacles or delays in building broadband. So hopefully we can all work together to do that in.
Well,
on net neutrality, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Drew.
No, you finish your thought there, please.
And on net neutrality, having been involved in net neutrality battles since the very beginning, since 2001 when Michael Powell first adopted policies at the FCC and the term net neutrality became known. And as we've gone through 2 decades of unsustainable, unpredictable net neutrality policy, I'm hoping that as a full FCC and Congress looks at a permanent, predictable, certain, sustainable net neutrality policy. Why is it important? As we've gone through the transitions away and beginning to phase out almost completely the TDM networks and the old networks, and now everything is internet-based, IP-based, over-the-top, internet-based applications, from voice to video to data to every service is over the internet. And so we need to have a very clear, sustainable policy that maintains the incentives for investment in broadband and allows everyone to compete equally. It is a great competition policy from our perspective. And as we've worked on competitive interconnection policy, specifically over the last 6, 7, 8 years in regulatory policy and in merger conditions, we really believe that it's led us, we talk about the Zoom boom. We have a streaming explosion and streaming revolution that is now taken root and taken hold, that's changed the marketplace. And most importantly, by having streaming video and streaming applications and streaming services, it gives, whether it's Claude's member or Matt's member or our competitive members, a new economic model for deploying broadband services. And so net neutrality, when done right, leads to greater broadband deployment, greater investment. And so we'll be working with everyone, hopefully, to see that done.
Well, Chip, isn't the best, or only if not, well, it's certainly the best, if not the only way to get this out of the regulatory ping pong is to get Congress to act on the issue of net neutrality. How does that happen?
Now, we think that if you would have a permanent legislative congressional solution that created a new title, so that we get out of the old Title II fight and all of the issues that come with Title II, and simply do a clean, simple new title with all of the net neutrality principles of no blocking, no prioritization, no discrimination, that we could find consensus around that permanent congressional solution.
Okay, I want to ask a question of both Matt and Claude, and it concerns the difference between the approach that IIJA took in doling the vast bulk of the money to states, which will then be partners in the process, versus the prior principal approach through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund of reverse auctions and bids on that. I definitely like to get Claude's take on that, but first with you, Matt, do you have any concerns about the IIJA approach?
Not concerns in general, but to my earlier comment, the rules were designed under the IIJA to be fair and to be focused. Let's look at where broadband isn't, where it's needed the most. Let's look at the Americans who can't afford it, and let's provide funds to meet that need. And also, let's provide a very strong, require states to have a very strong, robust challenge process so that we can respect the private investment that already exists where broadband already exists. And those rules are something that we supported. We fought very hard for it, and we supported when it was finally passed. Now the question comes to implementation. Right now, the NTIA will be embarking over the next 30 days in a rulemaking process. We'll be participating in this, as I'm sure all of the other associations, Claude and CHIPS will as well, to help encourage that NTIA follows the rules of the IIJA as outlined by Congress to focus on that unserved need. And so I think if we stay close to the rules, then I think this program, whether done through the NTIA or the FCC, can actually accomplish a great deal. That's our expectation. Sometimes the rubber hits the road when we see the implementation in the rulemaking process, where maybe the rules aren't necessarily exactly what the legislation said. We hope that doesn't happen, but rather NTIA supports right along as written what's in the act itself. And then the question is also on the state level. Once money goes to the states, neither of our associations here have direct insight necessarily into all 50 state capitals, plus the territories out there where we have members. And we have to keep an eye on that, working with our members, working with our state associations. So this year, I think that means education and spending time to communicate about what the specific rules are, why they were passed as they were, and then to support that, not only in an encouraging way, but also with accountability and oversight. So, despite the fact that maybe you would have thought that money would come through the FCC, which is more or less the traditional broadband funder, we've had programs through the NTIA before, thinking back to the American Recovery Act in 2009. But this time, I think the rules take into account history as well as the reality. And that's certainly what we help to encourage. And we're anxious to work with NTIA in getting this done right.
Claude, your thoughts on the auction versus state approach?
Well, I think at the end of the day, there are risks and opportunities in both approaches, but it's incumbent to get the details right. And I think that's why all of us are here and are so engaged in a lot of these policies, because the details really do matter. I mean, you look back at RDOF versus the CAF2 reverse auction. There were a couple of small policy tweaks. For example, the preference for gigabit networks in the clearing rounds that completely changed the way folks bid, and I think led to a lot of dissatisfaction with some of the outcomes there. Now we're dealing with a new framework, and then it's equally incumbent on both the Department of Commerce as well as the individual states to get those policy details right. Because as I mentioned earlier, as you turn the dials, for example, if you turn the upload speed requirement dial a little bit too high, that potentially makes more densely populated areas eligible at the potential cost of some of the more rural and unserved areas. So I think a lot of times it's these details that it's just incumbent upon us to get right in order to be able to have the most positive impact on connectivity for all Americans, which is why I think you heard both Chip and Matt talk about the need to engage in new and in new ways to at the state level. And that's something that we're absolutely looking at WISPA as well.
Well, that is a very interesting thought, the kind of role of, it's almost like pushing some of these disputes we've had over and over again about rights of way access at the FCC federal level to a state level. And that may be a more appropriate place, obviously, because state law is generally the law governing rights of way access. I want to come to an issue. I may run into controversy from at least two of you, maybe all three, but I want to press ahead because I think that for example, I'm going to build on a question that's being asked here by Charles Baldwin. He says, rural Americans deserve to have competitive overbuild networks to ensure price competition and quality of service accountability. Do you support competitive funding overbuilding? And I'm going to embrace that term too, because it's kind of a dirty word. And I think overbuilding can be fairly said to be another word for competition, right? One person bringing a potentially superior network, whether it's higher capacity, symmetrical, or just higher capacity down and a lot higher up. And so I want to just, make sure we're understanding each other, right? Are you saying, Matt, Claude, Chip, perhaps, that we can't get higher capacity networks in areas of the country that have, pretty slow 25-ish download and 3 or 5 or 10-ish upload? I'd really invite all of you to kind of weigh in on this, and let's have a little bit of a discussion if we need to. I'll start with you, Matt.
I would say competition works. That's what we see in our marketplace. And frankly, our members are subject to competition from now increasing satellite competition and other providers in the market, Claude's members, Chips as well. So, I mean, it is a very robust market. But despite that, our members have worked on a very entrepreneurial basis with private capital and private funding to actually build the best broadband networks in the world. And that's something I think to look back on the last couple of years and to be proud of as a country, because these smaller companies, which typically don't have access to the large amounts of capital that large providers have, they were able to find the capital and build and take the risk to build and actually be prepared for the pandemic to meet the need before we even knew of such thing as COVID-19. And so I think that as we look back on the last couple of years, we can say that history has answered that question. Competition does work. And so, no, we're not supportive of rate regulation of broadband providers' rates in any way, but rather to try to encourage more providers into the market to actually have that competition, which you were talking about, Drew, to get there. Now, when it comes to funding under the IIJA, we are making a decision here to say we want to focus money where it's needed the most in very hard to reach areas. So there may be some unique circumstances, but even in the act itself, when it comes to, for instance, the broadband bill providing any provider that gets money to provide a low-cost option, even in that bill, it was specifically said that states and localities can't regulate rates. So I think the idea here is that let's have competition and let's use money to encourage competition, and that will solve the market problems just as it has forever.
Chip?
Well, Drew, I like your framing. Overbuilding is another word for competition. Now, we also use the word new building. And I think that's what our objective is. And something that we've talked about in the past, the failure, I think, of our subsidy policy over the last 2 decades to 3 decades is that we subsidize the maintenance of old networks. And so it extended the life of copper and coaxial instead of incentivizing the building of new networks or new buildings. Today and for the future, fiber has to be extended, expanded, and densified, whether it's a fixed wireless network, a cable network, a competitive network, a satellite network, or a mobile commercial network. Fiber is the foundation for all of those networks and all of those technologies. And only fiber can bring us the symmetrical speeds and capacities that will future-proof and scale over time so that we can do advanced manufacturing, telemedicine, precision agriculture, artificial intelligence. quantum computing. All of the applications are going to need future networks. So my fear of failure in this round of funding would be if we subsidize the past instead of funding the future.
Well,
And
so
that brings about competition. And E-rate is an example where competition in the E-rate program has given us higher capacity, higher speeds at lower prices for our critical anchor institutions. We need to find that as the precedent and the principle going forward on the funding. And whether it's Google Fiber or Socket in Missouri or Idea Tech in Kansas or C Spire in Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, or the fiber new entrants, they have every right to compete against the incumbent cable or telco to build the best network at the fastest speed, at the most symmetrical capacity, so that we do future-proof our economy. And that's what we'll be advocating for.
Let's get Claude's take on this, and maybe we'll have another round. We'll
Sure.
see.
So I think and I generally agree that I think competition has been shown to work in many markets other than telecommunications, and it's absolutely worked in the telecom market as well. And in fact, a lot of our members provided that competition to old DSL networks, to satellite networks, and really were the first robust terrestrial option in a lot of places. I do come back to it's incumbent upon us to get the details right. And I think it can be challenging in an area like technology to say this is what we know 100% will or will not happen. And I could go back and think about an experience that we had in the CAF2 funding at the FCC, where fixed wireless was allowed to bid at the 100 by 20 tier. And there, in fact, were some winners of funding at the 100 by 20 tier. And the DC experts said there was no way that fixed wireless could do that. And we're seeing some winners of that funding now deploying 400 by 100 fixed wireless networks in those areas where experts said that was impossible. So I don't think we should really short sell the ability of innovators to be able to continue to meet consumers' needs regardless of the technology, which is why I think we were pleased to see in the IIJA a tech diverse approach taken. Now, I think on the other side, there are absolutely risks. So, and I think of another story from one of our members who a couple years ago sold his car for $19,000 and started to build out a really robust fixed wireless network in rural Nebraska, and is offering 200 by 100 speeds to folks in rural Nebraska. Now, as a result of some of the details in the ARPA funding guidance, which said we're only going to count wired networks as actually being there, he's now having a large out-of-state subsidized competitor come in and effectively compete with the $19,000 he put in of his own life savings. Now, is that the right policy outcome? I think that's for us to debate, but we have a rural entrepreneur's livelihood and rural jobs on the line as a result of that. So I think it's incumbent upon us to think carefully about the real impacts that these policy decisions are having on real life people.
So one thing I appreciate from my going to WISPAPalooza and WISP America is learning about the argument that, all right, yes, we want higher speeds. You talked about a path to gigabit, but symmetricality may be oversold from the viewpoint of a lot of your members. At the same time, Claude, I mean, I've joked that maybe you need to change WISPA's name from the Wireless Internet Service Provider Association to fiber, because almost all of your members are talking fiber. They're talking about how to build fiber projects. So Claude, you take a first stab at it. I'd love Matt and Chip's thought as well of, using a wireless play, but perhaps figuring out how we get the funding to fiber and to build fiber deeper to neighborhoods. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think people are going to be very disappointed if they're going to be told, oh, sorry, you already have a 25/3 provider in your neighborhood. None of these funds can go to you.
Right. And I think there is, and that's what I love about our members, is they are flexible and they are always willing to use the right tool for the job. So if the federal government is dictating fiber, they're going to figure out a way to do fiber. If the fiber is not going to work, they're going to try to figure out a way to make it via fixed wireless. They'll deploy fiber in a neighborhood and backhaul it via wireless. Right. They use every tool in the toolkit to get the job done and get the most Americans connected at the best possible speeds and the most affordable as well. So I think at the end of the day, it is really all tools in the toolkit, and that's the approach that we're advocating. A lot of our members are doing fiber, and that's fantastic. And a lot of folks are doing fixed wireless, and that's fantastic as well. We just are a little bit wary about a one-size-fits-all solution here that takes the choice out of the localities, the providers' hands and dictates the outcome, because that has the ability to move markets in a way that is less than optimal at the end of the day.
Matt and Chip, what's your reaction to this conversation about multiple technologies and making sure we don't limit funding to 25/3 capacity areas?
Well, when you look at the broadband infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure fund, that was the intent. The intent was to focus money with the hopes that fiber or very high-speed broadband would be built to essentially, build future-proof systems where we wouldn't have to go back and fund them again because there wasn't enough broadband provided. Our members, just as Claude said, are innovative. Because of one of our members, Service Electric, that put a tower on a hillside and ran a cable to a TV repair store, the idea was created that essentially, birthed what we're talking about today, which is broadband. So, our members are always going to be looking for the next opportunity as the market dictates, whether it's using fiber or, I loved how you said it, Claude, tools. And other providers will be part of that equation as well. As small rural providers, sometimes, our reach is limited in terms of how far we can go economically. But thank goodness we're talking about other technologies to help meet the need that exists, or maybe even to find ways to partner to meet that need. So,
Matt, what is a typical speed for one of your rural members, and what kinds of technologies are most of your members using these days when they do build new networks or upgrade their networks?
Well, first off, all of the above in terms of technologies, but we have today many members who say, look, I'm overbuilding myself with fiber because it's what I need for the future to meet the capacity, to meet the demand of my customers and my communities, my educational institutions, healthcare, et cetera. So they have every incentive to provide the fastest, future-proof networks that they can in their marketplaces. Most of our members, even in the smallest markets, whether they're using some form of DOCSIS or otherwise, are somewhere 500 megabits down and significantly high up speeds as well. So we are definitely meeting the need, but the role here of what we can do working together with government and some of these funds is actually to increase that, so that whether it's through fiber or through other builds and other technology, we are building future-proof networks. And as our members look ahead to taking advantage of funds through the IIJA, they're talking about, when they go into new areas, they're talking about fiber, and they want to build it to make sure that what they provide is future-proof.
And what are your typical speeds of your members, Matt?
We have members that range well over a gig. We have members that are working towards 10 gig today, many that are direct fiber to the home providers. On average, most of our members are looking at somewhere between, I would say 100 and 500, the really small ones. Our largest members.
And upstream?
20, again, it's all over the board, so it's mostly a guess, but 20, 50, something like that. But the fact is that they're all looking to do more. And that's why they're so excited about these programs working together in their communities to identify unserved, underserved areas, use the money to make it happen. And so they're committed to future-proof networks that meet the need today and going forward.
Chip, what would you say to Claude's member here who spent $19,000 of his own money building a 200 downstream, 100 upstream network and is getting, quote, overbuilt or competed against with the fiber network?
Yeah, we do have to be careful, not to displace private investment with public subsidies. And so we do have member companies that have built out networks that have high capacity and high speeds. And so we do need to be careful while we balance the need to really create a national competition for these funds for the highest capacity, highest speed, most symmetrical service in the unserved and underserved areas of our country. And like Matt and Claude, our members, not to play off our name, encompass every technology. And we believe in all of the above strategy. We have Amazon as a member company about to deploy Kuiper, which will be a low Earth orbiting satellite service. We have Dish, which is deploying a new 5G service. We have member companies that are like Claude's who do fixed wireless. We have fiber to the home. And what we need to do is incentivize all of those different technologies to compete for the funding for everyone to have a chance at the very highest speed, highest capacity, most symmetrical service. And what we don't need to do is to have a system that disincentivizes the building of those highest speed, highest capacity, most symmetrical networks.
Right.
What I don't want to do is subsidize the past instead of funding the future.
Well, a point very well taken. We have just 3 minutes remaining. I'm going to give each of our panelists a chance to say something about a topic besides IIJA, because we've talked so much about that, and maybe like your most offbeat prediction for 2022. And we'll go Claude, Matt, and conclude with Chip. I just want to say thank you to each of you, our panelists, as well as our audience for being here. I want to remind you, we're here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. Next week, we're going to be talking about state broadband offices, their role in implementing IIJA, and the week following, we'll be talking about AI. I also want to give a shout out and a great thanks to our sponsors, Utopia Fiber, Lit Communities, Broadband Money, Broadband Now, Samsung, Positron Access, Lightbox, California Emerging Technology Fund, and also we're grateful for Powerhouse Management. Without each of you, we wouldn't be able to carry forward on our programs, both in person like today and online. And so with that, let's go ahead and give Claude your word.
Offbeat prediction for 2022. I think this harkens back to the conversation we're having at the opening. Predict the Steelers win the Super Bowl.
I'm for that.
Matt and I love that one. I don't know. I think it's difficult to say in this space just because we're seeing so much change and so much convergence in the technology space with different providers using different technologies, subsidies going here, subsidies going there. I don't know if it's possible to make an offbeat prediction here about the space, but I know what I do know is that all of our members at the end of the day are going to continue to keep building, to keep serving more people, regardless of whether they get funding or not at the end of the day. And that may be on beat, but it's just because I couldn't think of anything offbeat other than the Steelers.
Well, thank you for being with us and for your thoughts on all these topics. Matt.
Well, Claude, I'll continue that theme in a second. But my first prediction is I think and I hope that implementation of the BEAD program through NTIA will be well done across all the states, and that we can look back and say this was a successful program, and we'll certainly be working in that direction. Secondly, Drew, I love what you were saying before about, maybe something related to retransmission consent. For my broadcaster friends, if any are in the audience, yeah, it's time to reform that old chestnut going back to 1992. And I still love to talk and debate that. And finally, Claude, this one's for you as well. You may have noticed this, but Pittsburgh Penguins win the Stanley Cup.
There you go.
Great, we got some Pittsburghers here. If we say that, I don't know. Yeah. Pittsburghites. Yeah. I forgot to mention one of our sponsors, Render Networks. Thank you to Render Networks for your support. And now the final word to Chip Pickering of Encompass.
So my prediction for the year is that Gigi Sohn will be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. We'll have a full slate of the FCC sometime in the first quarter of this year. And what it has been a long, hard effort to do maps right, broadband maps right, will finally be done and completed this year so that the funding can be released and hopefully done in the right places in the right way. So that's my big prediction. And then the last sports prediction is that Arch Manning, the grandson of Archie Manning and the son of Cooper Manning and the nephew of Peyton and Eli, will sign with Ole Miss. Ole Miss will rise to the top of college football during his playing times with Ole Miss, and that is my final prediction.
Well, I couldn't figure out who you were rooting for in the Sugar Bowl, Chip. Being a graduate of both Ole Miss and Baylor, but on behalf of Chip Pickering of Encompass, Matt Polka of ACA Connects, and Claude Aiken. We here are at Clyde's, but Claude Aiken is the CEO of WISPA. I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Drew, thank you.
Thanks,
Matt,
everybody.
thank you all.
See you guys.